The city was already awake when the winter light reached the lower floors of the apartment buildings along West End Avenue. Streetcars rattled past, horses stamped at the corners, and the river lay grey and steady beyond the warehouses. In one narrow building with a shared staircase and thin walls, a young woman stood each morning at her window before work, folding a letter she had already read twice. She did not reread it again. She only pressed it flat, slid it back into its envelope, and placed it carefully inside a tin box beneath her bed. Her name was Clara Delaney, and she worked as a clerk for a shipping firm near the docks. She had come to New York from a smaller city years earlier, drawn by steady wages and the promise of independence. Her boarding house was filled with other working women, each of them polite, busy, and quietly private. The halls smelled of boiled coffee and coal smoke, and the stairs creaked with the weight of daily routines. She first noticed him on a morning when the wind was sharp and the sidewalks were slick with half-frozen slush. He lived one floor below her, in a single room with a narrow window facing the alley. She knew this only because she saw him step out of that door every weekday morning, always at the same time, coat buttoned high, hat pulled low, his gloved hand holding a leather satchel. He worked for a geological survey office downtown, copying reports and organizing maps sent from expeditions far beyond the city. They did not speak at first. Their days crossed on the staircase, sometimes on the front step, sometimes at the corner where they turned in opposite directions. He would nod slightly. She would return the gesture. That was all. Yet over time she learned the sound of his step, the pause before he opened the front door, the way he sometimes stopped to adjust his scarf, as if he were about to say something and then thought better of it. In the evenings, when Clara returned, tired and smelling faintly of ink and paper dust, she often found him seated in the front parlor, reading by the dim light of a shared lamp. He always rose when she entered, not out of ceremony but habit, and offered her the chair nearest the warmth. Sometimes she accepted. Sometimes she passed through with a brief smile. The silence between them was not awkward. It felt settled, like furniture that had always been there. The letters in her tin box were from her cousin Paquita, who lived far away, married to a man whose work had taken him to the farthest edges of the world. The cousin wrote of waiting, of time measured in months, of words traveling farther than people could. Clara had never met the man, but she had read enough to understand the discipline of patience, the way affection could be carried quietly across long distances. She never mentioned these letters to the man downstairs, yet she felt their presence when she saw him writing at the small table in the parlor, his pen moving carefully, as if each word mattered. As winter shifted slowly toward spring, their routines remained steady. On Sundays, they sometimes walked partway down the block at the same pace before one turned aside. At the corner, they paused under the street lamp, exchanging a few sentences about the weather or the state of the sidewalks. His voice was calm, measured. Hers was soft but certain. Neither asked the questions that hovered just beneath the surface, where the other had come from, whether there was someone waiting elsewhere, what plans lay beyond the next season. Clara felt her thoughts turn toward him in small, ordinary ways. She noticed when he was absent, when his room stayed dark longer than usual. She wondered about the places marked on the maps she glimpsed when he forgot to close his satchel. He, for his part, began to time his return to coincide with hers, lingering at the doorway until he heard her step on the stair. Yet the city was full of rules that needed no words. A woman alone did not invite attention. A man without means did not presume. They both understood this, without ever speaking of it. Their connection lived in glances, held a moment longer than necessary, in the shared warmth of the parlor on cold evenings, in the sound of each other's presence through thin walls. The turning point came quietly, as most things did. One evening, Clara found a notice pinned to the board near the front door. The survey office was sending clerks west, temporarily, to assist with a growing volume of reports. The notice was unsigned, but she knew at once it concerned him. That night, she heard him packing, the careful placement of books, the soft thud of shoes inside the satchel. They met on the staircase the following morning. He was carrying his bag, his coat heavier than usual. She held her gloves in her hands, not yet ready to leave. For a moment, neither moved. The city's noise filtered in from the street, distant and unimportant. "I'll be away for some months," he said at last, as if stating a fact that needed no response. "I hope the work goes well," she replied. It was the right thing to say. He nodded. "I will write to the landlady to keep my room." She understood that this was not an invitation. It was simply an explanation. She smiled, and he returned it. and then he stepped past her and was gone. The days that followed felt altered in ways she could not have explained. The parlor was quieter. The staircase echoed differently. Clara continued her routines, continued reading her cousin's letters, continued working and walking and returning home at dusk. Sometimes she imagined writing a letter herself, addressing it to a city she had never seen, folding into it all the words she did not know how to say, but she did not write. Silence had become its own form of honesty. Months passed. Summer came, bringing open windows and the smell of tar and river water. One evening, a letter arrived for Clara, addressed in an unfamiliar hand. It was from him. He wrote briefly, carefully, describing the office, the heat, the long hours. He asked after the building, the parlor lamp, the state of the staircase. He did not speak of missing her. He did not need to. She wrote back. Her letter was equally restrained. She told him about the boarding house, about a new tenant, about the way the city changed with the season. She folded the letter neatly, sealing it as she had seen her cousin do, and placed it in the post with a sense of quiet resolve. Their correspondence continued, measured and infrequent. Each letter carried the weight of what was left unsaid. Clara kept them in the tin box, alongside her cousin's. She understood now what those distant letters had meant. They were not promises, they were acknowledgments. When he returned in late autumn, the city had turned again. They met, as they always had, on the staircase, exchanging nods that carried more meaning than before. They resumed their shared silences, their small conversations. Nothing outward had changed, yet everything had. Time, however, moves whether one invites it or not. Another opportunity came, this one permanent. He told her one evening, standing beneath the street lamp, that he would be leaving the city for good. The work would take him farther than letters could easily follow. She listened, she nodded, she wished him well. On his last morning, she watched from her window as he walked away, his figure blending into the city's steady motion. She returned to her room, opened the tin box, and held the letters once more. Then she closed it and placed it back beneath the bed. Years later, she would think of him when reading about distant places in the newspaper, about men whose lives unfolded far from the streets she knew. She would remember the quiet understanding they had shared, shaped by time, distance, and the city that had held them both. It was not a love spoken aloud. It did not need to be. It had existed in routine, in restraint, in the simple fact of having been known, briefly and clearly, within the vast and indifferent city.